Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is a PhD sleep researcher. He specializes in human sleep optimization. He's been doing that for the better part of 30 years. He has a program titled Surviving Shift Work that can hopefully help me and you do a little bit better with a little bit less when it comes to sleep from work. My guest this week, Dr. Glenn Landry of Neos Performance. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Glenn.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I really am excited to pick your brain here. You have a lot of knowledge that I know I could benefit from, and I think the people that listen to this podcast are going to benefit from it too. So as is the format of the show, we start out each episode with hopefully my dumbest question of the day. We're going to spin the wheel of stupid questions, and we're going to see where it takes us. So I really do have a wheel. It's not a joke. Here we go. I'm going to spin the wheel and we're going to see where we start at. Oh, yes. Okay. You did not think you were going to talk about this today. Who would win in a fight between a grizzly bear, a tiger, and a gorilla?
Oh, man. Well, I do love me a grizzly, so I'm going to give it the grizzly. It's just got the, it's got the ability, I'm thinking.
It does seem that the grizzly bear is the most ferocious. Sometimes you see kind of temperate tigers and gorillas, but grizzly bears are rarely, I'm
thinking the gorilla may have a chance, but the tiger, no.
Well, the intellect of the gorilla probably would help, I would imagine.
I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to waste your time anymore. Let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that's sleep. So give me a little rundown of your history to get to this point where you're kind of this expert in sleeping. I certainly am not. So bring me up to speed with how you got here.
All right. So let me just start by saying I started in the field really more than 30 years ago because as a teenager, I simply couldn't sleep. So my interest in sleep started then. As a teenager, when I say I couldn't sleep, the hours from 11 o'clock until 4 in the morning were my favorite time of day, even though it wasn't day. And my brain was ready to process information. So I could study, I could write papers, I could solve issues that just during the day were impossible for me. And what I learned over time is the hours from in the morning to the mid-afternoon, that was not a good time for me. And so everything was hard during those hours. Whereas at night, everything was easy. And so that began an interest in, I figured that was just me. Turns out that I had an undiagnosed condition called delayed sleep phase onset, but essentially it just, in lay terms, it just means that I was an extreme night owl. And it turned out, I had beautiful parents, both working professionals. They wanted me in bed for 10:30. And, my dad would always say to me that I was turning my nights into days and my days into nights, and it couldn't possibly be healthy. But he wasn't a doctor, and, I wasn't going to listen to him because I felt so good. It just felt so right for me to be up at night and sort of sleeping during the early part of the day. And that began this, I would adapt and I would, sort of schedule everything so that I could be at my best when I needed to be at my best. And so I'm going to tell you about 3 life-changing moments. The first life-changing moment was eventually when I got to university, I took a course from a world-renowned expert in something called circadian rhythms and sleep. His name is Dr. Ralph Misselberger. And he changed my life because circadian rhythms are daily biological rhythms. You can think of it as we have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, and nighttime physiology and biology and behavior. We need to keep them separate because they're incompatible processes. And so what Ralph taught me how to do very quickly is be able to control my circadian rhythms by what I was doing during the day and at night when I couldn't sleep. And by doing these things, I was able to get to bed for 10 o'clock at night and sleep really soundly until 7 in the morning, when I would then get up. I joined his lab. In fact, I joined his lab, did an honors, a master's, a PhD in his lab. And that's pretty much unheard of. You would normally do your graduate work in different labs. But he changed my life in the fact that I was able to get to sleep and sleep really soundly. And I went from being a good but not great student to being able to compete and win national scholarships that funded my honors, my master's, my PhD, and eventually a postdoctoral fellowship at University of British Columbia. And so that was life-changing moment number one. Life-changing moment number two happened in between my undergrad and my postdoc or my graduate work. And what happened is my grandfather and grandmother moved in to live with my parents because my grandmother had been hiding Alzheimer's from us. And so my grandpa was quite advanced in the stage of that disease, and it was just too much for her to be able to take care of him any longer. And from that point, I learned that we have a family history of Alzheimer's. And in fact, we have a particularly nasty set of genes that predispose us in our family to obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's. Essentially, what I will tell you is our brain's like an engine. It produces exhaust. Wakefulness is actually toxic, and it's producing this exhaust. When you have these genes, you produce more of that exhaust. So life-changing moment number two was learning the science evolved to the point where we understood this in 2013. We understood the mechanisms that, yes, the brain's like an engine, but sleep literally washes away that exhaust. And so by being an elite sleeper, I am able to overcome these nasty genes because, yes, I'm producing more exhaust, but I'm an elite sleeper and I'm washing away that excess exhaust. So that was life-changing moment number two, realizing that this thing that I, was a geek about sleep science, this thing that I had become so passionate about was actually really important for my long-term health and performance. So that was life-changing moment number two. Life-changing moment number three, after 20 plus years in the field studying circadian rhythms and sleep, thinking that I was going to spend my life in academia producing and publishing research and having an impact on the world that way. By the time 2014 rolled around, we knew enough to make a difference in people's lives. The gap that existed was not new science that was needed. The gap that existed was translating that science and getting it into the hands of people that needed it most, like first responders, firefighters, getting that science into their hands, but not just that, actually translating the science to their individual lived experience. Because the problem with a one-size-fits-all approach is that it doesn't fit. It doesn't work for people. And so then people will think, they'll try something, it doesn't work, and they think, it can't be that. Well, the truth is, you just didn't try it the right way. You've got to apply the science to your lived experience, and that's how you get the impact that we've managed to have with people. So that was really life-changing moment number three, was realizing, okay, I need to get out of this ivory tower. I've got to get out of academia and I've got to get into the communities and work with people. And that, to be honest with you, was a leap of faith. My mother had always told me, do what you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. But what she didn't really explain is, you do have to find a way to get people to do to pay you to do what you love. And that's a real challenge, right? And so the leap of faith for me was leaving academia and deciding to become a sleep coach. And at the time that I did that, I remember my wife, when I explained that I was going to leave academia and become a sleep coach, she was like, honey, I married a doctor. And I was like, no, I'm still going to be a doctor. I'm just going to be in the community having an impact, and I'll be a sleep coach. And she was like, honey, is there even such a thing as a sleep coach? I've never heard of that before. And I said, well, no, but that's what I'm going to be. And we're going to change the world that way. So those are the life-changing moments that really have brought me to you today. I spent more than 20 years really studying the field, and then the last decade building out a business, and now Neos Performance, that's what we do. And Neos means new dawn. So new dawn performance is really what we're unleashing to the world here. We want everybody to understand the importance of sleep, understand why they're not getting the sleep they need, and then begin their journey toward elite sleep. And what I mean by elite sleep is performance enhancing sleep. And it turns out that it's more than just hours slept. It's the sleep architecture, getting the right staging. So we'll talk about that today.
Yeah. It's so just pressing in my brain of how poor, if you were to analyze my sleep, you would probably throw up because it's so poor, so consistently. And I'm constantly propped up by Monster energy drinks and some sort of, coffee, a couple pots of coffee. But so when you think about these early things you talked about with kind of like having a predisposition to being a night owl or other people that might have different preferences in their sleep patterns, is there one that's correct? And is every one of them fixable?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me start by sort of explaining this. The world knows that sleep's important. And so it's become such a hot topic. You see it everywhere around you. This product or that product or this lifestyle is best for sleep. Let me be very clear. The first thing that we should talk about is, how much sleep is enough. And I think, the science has gotten to the point where we have consensus on this. Experts agree worldwide. This is not contentious. The average individual, and let's talk about adults for a moment. The average adult 30 plus needs 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night. That's what they need. And when they don't get that sleep, our brain can compensate. So it doesn't mean that if you don't get 7, you're going to immediately be non-functional. It's not like that. Our brain can compensate. Think of it as the sympathetic nervous system. So that fight or flight response, it gets engaged. So when we go beyond 16 hours, our sympathetic nervous system can compensate. But here's the thing, that system is designed for brief periods of superhuman performance. The problem that we have in current society is that the average individual is getting about 30 plus, is getting about 6.5 hours of sleep each night, actual sleep. Now keep this in mind that in order to get 7 hours of actual sleep, you need to spend about 8 hours in bed. That's the programming that we evolved for. A 16-hour waking day, and then an 8-hour sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep each night. Now, when we don't get that, we're engaging this emergency mechanism that gives us brief periods, as I say, of superhuman performance. Now, the problem is that the way we currently live our lives, we were born with the ability to get the sleep we need, but the way we currently live our lives has taken us further and further away from what we evolved for optimal human performance and health. And so we're training the ability to get the sleep we need out of the system. And sadly, we're training that out of our systems at a very young age now. That's a dramatic difference. When I started in the field over 30 years ago, we'd known that sleep changed as a normal course of aging. And back then, and just to give you a sense of what that looks like, back then, that normal course of aging would begin, we'd see this in people in their 70s, and they would be able to sleep for about 3-4 hours, no problem. But then after that point, they'd begin waking up. And from that point forward, they would really struggle to sustain sleep. We called it normal age-related change in sleep. Now that's normal, but it's not healthy, and it need not be inevitable. Now, fast forward 30 years later, and we're seeing those changes in people 30 plus. So it's dramatically changed. We've really accelerated this process of what we called normal age-related change in sleep. We now know it is normal, but it's not healthy, and there are things that we can do about it. And the key thing, getting back to your question, is really understanding that our brain and our body must be ready for sleep at the time we've scheduled it. And the trouble that we're having right now is that sleep's the first thing we sacrifice to meet the growing demands of work, family, and social life balance. And what that means is that our sleep schedule's constantly changing to fit whatever the demands are. And that has a huge impact on circadian rhythms, daily biological rhythms. It's getting back to what I said about my father. He was absolutely right. He wasn't a doctor, but these things that were just obvious to him turned out to be true. You know, we all know what we need to do. We got to exercise, we got to eat right, we got to get lots of sleep. But what very few people understand is it's not just what you do that matters, it's when you do these things that matters as much or actually more. And so getting timing right is critical. There's a time and a place for everything. And so timing, again, is everything. We need to prepare our brain and body for the sleep window that we've scheduled.
So with that, I feel like there's kind of this, I don't want to say hierarchy, but maybe the early birds seem to think that they're better than the night owls. For whatever reason, you could be awake the same amount of hours in a day, but if I start my day at 4 and you start your day at 11, you're lazy and I'm a hard worker. Doesn't matter how many hours in the day we spend working. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so imagine how I feel about that, because I told you at the outset that I was this extreme night owl. And it wasn't until I learned how to take control of circadian rhythms that I was able to get to sleep for 10 and sleep until 7. There is this notion out there that the hours of sleep you get before midnight are the most important hours. And like any myth that propagates, it's based on, there's some truth to that. So the issue is that we need to be consistent about our sleep schedule. And I realize I'm, in the firefighter community, we've got 24-hour shifts and we've got all of these kinds of things that we have to navigate. Let me be clear. It is absolutely possible to anchor your circadian rhythms, work shifts, and still be able to get really healthy sleep. So that's what we have a program called Surviving Shift Work. It's online. Think Netflix for sleep health. It is all about teaching people how to navigate a shift work system and still be able to anchor their circadian rhythms so that they can get the healthy sleep that they need. So it is absolutely possible. And early birds are not better than night owls. In fact, one of the things, if you think back to what I was just saying about older adults, what we see as people get older is they go from being a tendency to being night owls to being early birds. And the thinking was that they just needed less sleep because they're doing less, they're not learning as much, and they're just nowhere near as active. And so they don't need as much sleep. And we now know that's patently false. And older adults still needs to get 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep to promote health. all that's happening when we shrink our sleep and we're not getting the sleep we need is we're really borrowing from the health and wellness of our retirement years, out years. We're accelerating aging when we don't get the sleep we need. So what's more important is to get the timing right. And if you are a night owl, it's absolutely possible to shift your circadian rhythms so that you can get a more natural sleep earlier and be able to function in the day. It's just about providing the right time cues so that you can anchor your circadian rhythms appropriately. An interesting point is that I happen to marry an early bird, and our dating lives in the beginning were really difficult because, you know, I'm an extreme night owl and she was an early bird. And she'd be getting up to, you know, teach a gym class in the morning. And I'd be getting up in the morning at a time when I was not ready to get up in the morning. But I'd drive her to her gym class and then we'd go for breakfast. I mean, that was love. And it's just one of those things where now when we work with people, I like to say that sleep is a team-based sport. Think of the family household, everybody in the house, and this is important for shift workers. We all have to be on the same team working together to promote sleep. And so what we do with, you know, couples is help them. You get an early bird and a night owl together. What you have to do is get the night owl to be a little bit earlier and get the early bird to be a little bit later so that they can meet in the middle. So it absolutely is possible for us to take control of our circadian rhythms as long as we understand the science. And most importantly, we have to be able to take that science and apply it to the individual so that it matches their lived experience, translating the science in a way that's very unique to that individual.
So when you think about that, managing shift work, obviously the vast majority of this audience is going to be people that work shift work. What are some of the things that you can think of, kind of rattle off the top of your head, that are like actual tangible tools that we can do to take back kind of control of the circadian rhythm?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for a shift worker is that they have to work at night and they can't anchor to the night because they're going to be working shifts. So it's not like they could just permanently turn their nights into day and their day into nights. In fact, we see that people on permanent shifts actually aren't able to synchronize. Like the thinking way back used to be that it would be better to just have people on night shifts or day shifts. And we now know that's not true. And so I'm not going to be able to make it so simple that everybody's going to be able to listen to this podcast and solve the problem. Remember, it's about translating science to an individual's unique, specific needs. But in general terms, here are the things. What you have to do is anchor your circadian rhythm to stay day, because we evolved to be day active and nighttime sleepers. So we have to anchor our circadian rhythms so that we still have our physiology, our biology anchored to a day-night circadian rhythm. But when we're working those shifts, we're going to have to manage our light exposure, because light is a primary time cue that says this is day and this is night. So that's one of the primary time cues. And so for the person that's on the night shift, in the early part of the night, they need to blue block. And so if you're looking at the video here, this is a brightly lit screen, and this is what happens when we blue block. We take these orange lenses and we blue block, and you can see we can subtract the day cue, that is blue light, out by wearing those orange lenses. So in the beginning, we can stop that shifting by managing our light exposure. Now, everybody that's done shifts knows that the hours from, let's say, 2 a.m. for the average person, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is a real dangerous time. When we're talking about fatigue risk management, we really have to focus on 2 times of the 24-hour day. One is 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's when our brain is programmed to get REM sleep. And so the lights are on, but nobody's home. The brain will literally reboot during those times. And so we're not able, unless we've got got the adrenaline of, attending a scene or a call. That is a fatigue risk zone. And the other is about 12 hours opposite. It's that afternoon lull, let's say average 1 to 5 p.m. And so those two times are a period when our brain is actually programmed for sleep. We're programmed for a siesta, an afternoon nap, to bleed off excess sleep need that's accumulated over time. And so the key points here are managing your light exposure and then also managing your meal times. We're getting back to what we're programmed for. We're programmed for ingesting food and using the food that we eat. Unfortunately, what's happened in our society is that our meal times are more about social things rather than metabolic need now. And so it's become this thing where, anytime we're getting together, we're eating, we're drinking, we're enjoying each other's company. That's a reward signal, but it's not metabolic need. And the issue from a circadian rhythms perspective is helping people understand that adage, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It was actually true. It was, again, based in, reality, that what we're programmed for is a big breakfast, medium lunch, and small dinner. Think of it as big breakfast in front of our most active period of the day. And then a small dinner right before, or not right before, but in the hours before we're intended to be getting our most sedentary part of the day. So now think of this from a shift worker's perspective. If we're on 24s, for example, we could anchor our meals and have a big breakfast and smallish dinner and still be anchored, even though sometimes we're working days and sometimes we're working nights. So you could anchor your light exposure and your meal times appropriately. As long as you understand those principles, managing light exposure and being able to manage fatigue risk management. We talked about that briefly, but I should say that you certainly wouldn't want to be wearing blue blockers at a time when, that 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., that period. At that time, you want to get bright light exposure unless, like if you've got to attend a scene for firefighters. But, the nice thing for firefighters, one of the smartest things we ever did is allowing them to have an environment where they could get sleep between calls if necessary. You should be trying to sleep on those night shifts. Now, the problem that we have is that call utilization rates have gone through the roof, so that a lot of, depending on which hall you're in, a lot of engines are out perpetually throughout the night on a number of medicals or the other issue is that if 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is a fatigue risk management zone, that's also when cars are running into each other or running off the road. So you've got these other factors, but the general principles are stay day, anchor to the day in terms of your circadian rhythms, even though you're working these shifts. And again, we have a training program, think Netflix for sleep health, but it's called Surviving Shift Work, and it provides everything somebody needs to know about circadian rhythms and sleep in order to work shifts and still be at their very best in terms of performance and health.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit, this idea of like sleep debt. So like, is this a real concept, or is this some sort of like phony concept that's not anchored in any reality?
Oh, no, it's absolutely a reality. So let's put it this way. Getting back to the brain's like an engine, it's producing exhaust. That exhaust builds from the front of the brain and moves its way back. And if you get a 16-hour waking day and then an 8-hour sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep, it literally washes away that exhaust. You begin the next day with a well-washed brain and body. Your performance is going to be much, much better. Now, we've already mentioned that the way we currently live our lives, very few people are getting at least 7 hours of actual sleep. In fact, the epidemiological studies have shown worldwide that we have a silent pandemic happening, where the average person worldwide is getting less than 7 hours of actual sleep and closer to about 6.5 hours of actual sleep. So think about that. That's a 30-minute debt that they're accumulating night after night after night. Really, if we just expand that a little bit and we say, we know this from the science, that if you go 3 successive nights with 6 hours of sleep instead of 7 hours of actual sleep, that is the equivalent of pulling 1 all-nighter. So every 3 short duration sleeps is adding to this long-term debt. And what happens for a lot of people is that they will build up this debt and then try to pay it off on their days off. So, and let me be clear, we're all shift workers. That way we currently live our lives, sleep's the first thing we sacrifice. And so we're all shift workers. What's happening is that you see this, Monday to Friday routine for many people, and then they try to pay off that debt on the weekend. And you can recover sleep. So it is possible to pay off some of that sleep debt after you've, been burning the midnight oil, if you will. But the thing is, you don't get it all back. So this is an important question you haven't asked, but it's on the same line of thinking. And that is, if I short sleep for several nights and then I sleep for a really long time, can I get back to, what I've lost? And I think it's important for everyone to understand these principles. You can get back some, but not all. Let me put it to you this way. We work with elite athletes, and there used to be this notion that practice makes perfect. And then biomechanics came in and they said, it's not really practice, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. And what I would say is that isn't the full story either, because it's actually sleep to prepare the brain and body for new learning. So sleep plus perfect practice plus sleep to then consolidate all of that so that you can learn. So it's sleep plus perfect practice plus sleep that makes perfect. And so what's missing, and when I started in university, I used to cram for exams. And then what I found over time is the same for everyone, is that, you could cram for the exam, perform well on the exam, but then later that information was lost. It's really, if I had it to do over again, it would have been sleep plus study plus sleep, so that I didn't have to study near as much because I'd already remember the stuff that I previously studied. It would have made final exams so much easier. Instead of, cramming and dumping for each midterm, I would have had that information. I would have done so much better. So what you get back when you sleep, you can help wash away the excess exhaust, if you will. That you can do. You can recover in that sense. You can restore and repair tissues. Those things can happen, but you never get back that missed opportunity for the new learning and consolidation of that new learning, and that's what's lost. And let me touch on one thing too. A lot of your audience is going to say, well, I function best on 4 or 5 hours sleep max. If I sleep 7 or 8 hours, I wake up and I feel awful. Let me explain to you. The reason you feel awful is because your system, think of it as going from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So think fight or flight to recovery. And so what's happening is you're finally giving your system the opportunity to recover. And so it goes into this repair mode. So when you wake up out of that, you feel groggy, you've got sleep inertia, you just don't feel very good. It isn't that you didn't need that sleep and you feel bad. It's you really needed that sleep and that's why you feel bad. It's sort of like people that have been burning the midnight oil for a long time and then they go on vacation. And what happens shortly after they've been on vacation? They get sick. They go into recovery mode, and that's where, all of that repair needs to happen. So the answer to the question is finding a way not to borrow on a nightly basis so that you can absolutely optimize performance and health.
So you talked about our, the ability to recover. You talked about our predisposed nature to siesta. What's the ideal nap look like? We've talked power naps, and we've talked, like, sometimes at the station it's referred to as a combat nap.
Yes.
And we always say, 15, 20 minutes is going to be more beneficial than longer. Is that actually true? How do we optimize the limited time we have to maybe try to rest during the waking hours?
Yeah. So let's talk about it from a firefighter perspective. And so what you're dealing with in that situation is that you're going to have additional debt that you need to recover from, because the simple fact is the demands for the modern day firefighter is that they don't get as much time at the hall resting on those nights. And correct me if I'm wrong. Would you agree? They tend to be on calls. Yeah. Yes. So the issue, what I would say is, I want you to think about it in terms of day versus night, and what should be happening during the day and what should be happening at night. So when you think about it this way, napping strategies at nighttime, you should nap whenever possible during the night, because that's a time when the brain and body is supposed to be sleeping. So think about anchor. And so during those nights, when you get an opportunity to just bleed off a little bit of sleep need, it's huge. It's going to make a difference, because as you're extending, you're going more than the 16 hours sustained waking. As you're extending, every opportunity to nap, even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, is going to give you a little bit greater access to unimpaired performance. The only way to truly manage fatigue risk is to sleep. And so any opportunity to sleep at night is a good opportunity to sleep, and you should be trying to sleep for as long as possible. Now, there is this notion that, oh man, you don't want to sleep too long because then you're going to get into deep sleep or REM. And if you do, and then we get a call, you're going to have sleep inertia. Let me be clear about this. When the lights and the tone goes off and it's time to get up, adrenaline is going to get you into a state where you're going to be able to perform. And another thing to be very clear about is that when we're sleep deprived, we actually fall back on scripts much more effectively. You think of it as muscle memory. We're able to do the routine tasks very effectively when we're sleep deprived. This is why the medical community, if you want to talk about people that were raised in my ability to wear sleep deprivation as a badge of honor, that I can perform even though I've been up for 36 hours and I can get the job done. We know that when people are doing that, they fall back on the script really effectively. They're able to think of it as, if A, B, C, then do D, E, and F. They can do that highly effectively. What they're not good at doing is adjusting to the unexpected, being able to do things and think outside the box, being able to think creatively and solve problems that were unanticipated. That sleep deprivation just destroys people for that. And so what we need is to bleed off that sleep need whenever possible. And so napping at night is hugely important, and you should take full value for as much of that napping opportunity as you possibly can. Now, during the day, that's a different story. The nap window during the day, if we are anchored, let's say getting up at 6 and, going to bed at something like 10, something like that, if that's what we're really trying to shoot for, or 11 to 7, if that's what we're really trying to shoot for, the best way to think of when the ideal nap time is to add 6 hours to your wake up time. So, let's call that somewhere between noon and 1, that's when the nap window opens. And then subtract 6 hours from your bedtime. So that would be, 4 or 5. And so the nap window is going to be somewhere between 12 and 4 and 1 and 5, something in that neighborhood. And then the ideal nap time is less than 90 minutes. A sweet spot would probably be 45 minutes. and you could benefit from even 10 minutes. Like, I think that's the way to answer that question. However, if you are trying to get day sleep, you should use that nap window to, because we're talking about between shifts, you may be trying to sleep during the day. You want to utilize that nap window to its max and get as much time as you possibly can.
We've talked a lot about how to recover from, that buildup of exhaust to use your metaphor. Is there anything we can do to reduce the quantity of exhaust we're producing throughout the day?
Oh, that's an awesome question. So one is a nap. That's number one. So properly utilizing a nap window is number one. Another is looking at, well, you definitely your lifestyle factors, right? So what you eat, what you drink, all of those things that make life a little bit more enjoyable probably produce a little bit more exhaust. And so you want to be looking at those factors. And a key thing that I think everybody needs to understand is there's a difference between exercise or physical activity and breaking up sedentary. Breaking up sedentary every 30 to 60 minutes is really important because it's a day signal when we are active. And I'm not saying exercise. I'm not saying just not sedentary. So desk workers and people that are just, sitting down for a long period of time, we know that that's actually toxic. It's building more toxicity. So you want to break up sedentary, healthy lifestyle factors, and utilizing naps during the day will decrease the burden at night.
Okay, so this next line of question is very specifically for me because I have a feeling of what you're going to say, but this is also super prevalent in emergency response to fire service. Talk to me about the effects of nicotine and caffeine.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. So if I were to tell you that cocaine and speed are bad for sleep, you'd know that immediately, right? Because amphetamine and sleep are completely mutually exclusive. You cannot really sleep when you're on speed. Now, nicotine has the same impact, but to a lesser extent. And so this is an interesting thing. We did an analysis on this when I was still in my grad years. And what we saw is that, smoking has changed over the decades. And, it's making a comeback a bit now. But there was a period where, a lot of people had quit, and they had quit for decades. And so when we were looking at their sleep, we would see this fragmentation. So they were getting sleep, but there was this bit of fragmentation in the sleep. And fragmentation, think of that as frequencies of disruption in the sleep. And this fragmentation, it turned out, was strongly associated with prior smoking history. So if you smoked for, let's say, 5 years, a pack a day kind of habit. If you were a smoker and you did that for 5 years, we would see that in your sleep data decades later. So I know that that's not great news, but it does have an impact. And while you're still smoking, it has a tremendous impact. In the same way, caffeine has that impact. So what's happened is, instead of having strong day versus night circadian rhythms, the shift worker has sort of flattened out their circadian rhythm. They've turned their days into nights, their nights into days. And so it doesn't have strong signaling. So it doesn't have the strong performance. This is a waking day and this is a night. And so what they're doing is they're just in this perpetual state of fatigue that they're trying to overcome. So they're using stimulants like coffee and nicotine to just get through. It's survival mode. That's why I say, we named the program Surviving Shift Work, because you can't arrive on scene and get somebody to immediately go from dying to thriving, right? You got to get them into survival mode first. And that's what the program's really about, is getting people to understand the science so that they can begin the process of moving toward elite sleep. It is absolutely possible to do that in a shift work system. It's just a function of getting people through the stages of recovery and into thriving. And so understanding the impact of nicotine and caffeine is critical. And a lot of people in the shift work community would say, Glenn, I don't have a problem with caffeine. I can drink a cup of coffee. I could drink 3-4 cups of coffee and fall asleep, no problem. And they're right. They can fall asleep. It's the sleep architecture that's impacted. It's the fragmentation of the sleep, so that their eyes are closed, they're sleeping, but they're not getting elite sleep. They're not getting the performance enhancing sleep and the recovery sleep that they need.
Man, that is like, yeah, I mean, it's what I expected. I didn't expect you to say, actually, I think we're wrong about caffeine. It's great for sleep. And I didn't expect to hear that. But people that know me well know that I'm quite addicted to Monster energy drinks, and that gets me by. But hopefully after this conversation, I can learn from this and maybe change my ways. I think that would be good. Well, I don't want to take up all your day. I really appreciate the conversation. Man, there's so much to learn. I could probably talk to you for another 10 hours. But just tell people where they can find the information that you're putting out, how they can get hooked up with you. And just thank you so much for the work you're doing, because it's really valuable to the community.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. People can reach out to me at glenn@neosperformance.com.
Awesome. Yeah. Once again, I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. Take care.